Hello, I am Jyotika. Welcome to my channel. This is going to be a quick lesson on how you can answer an SAQ asking you to explain the use of a research method in a study. Students often tell me that they have very good practice in SAQs pertaining to specific studies or specific theories, but the SAQs they find challenging are those asking them to explain about research methods or asking them about ethical issues. So today I've taken up the SAQ that asks for the use of a research method. So let us see how to write this answer. Students also tell me they find it hard to get exemplars for these type of questions. So on your screen now you have a sample response that you could give to this type of a question. My aim in this lesson is not to read out the sample answer or to explain this particular sample answer to you, but my aim is to explain to you how you should be thinking about answering this type of a question, how you should be answering it, and of course I will use the sample question on the screen to illustrate the points that I am making. Let's start by reading the question. We should always read a question very carefully before beginning with the answer. The question here is, explain the use of one research method in one study of the role of hormones in behavior. So let us look at the key terms in this question. The first is the command term explain. Explain tells us that we need to justify why we are saying that a particular research method has been used in a study. So throughout the answer, our focus is going to be to keep on explaining why we are saying that this is the research method used in this study. Next important term in the question is one research method. We are clearly being told that we need to restrict the number of research methods we discuss to one. So we'll make sure we don't exceed this limit. In the same way, they have asked us to explain only one study. So we are going to restrict ourselves to one study. We will not exceed this limit. And finally, they are asking us about hormones. So from all the topics that are there in the biological approach, they have asked us for a very specific one, that of hormones. Now I know that students of the IBDP psychology program like to be parsimonious. So they like to study a minimum number of studies and answer with the help of those the maximum number of questions that they can. So you will be happy to know that if you prepare an answer to this question, you can answer one more question with the help of the same answer. That question is, explain the use of one research method in one study using the biological approach to understanding human behavior. Of course, this second question can be answered by many other studies, those explaining the use of some neurotransmitter or explaining the use of some genetic behavior, no doubt. But this answer is also one of those that you could use to address this question. So if you like the answer, the way we are preparing, you could use it for both the questions. Okay, now let's look at the answer. In the first part of the answer, the very beginning, I have named the research method that I'm going to be explaining the use of in this answer. We should never beat around the bush. This is a tip for all SAQs. We will not get into describing the characteristics of the research method or describing features of the study and leave it for the examiner to keep waiting to find out which is the research method we are discussing. That is not a considerate approach. Let the examiner know right at the beginning which research method you are going to be discussing. So within the first 3 words itself, you can see I have named the research method that I'm going to answer this question with. If instead I would have used a case study, I would have written a case study. So no matter which research method you are selecting, directly, explicitly name it right at the beginning of the answer. Now within the first 2-3 sentences, I have outlined the defining features of the research method that I have mentioned. Some students might feel this is like an introduction that I have given, and they would feel that for an SAQ we don't need to write introductions. This is not really an introduction. This is just addressing the question again, not only naming the research method, but also outlining it or identifying it in the true sense with its defining features. Saying that I'm discussing a true experiment by itself sounds enough, but there's no harm in also pointing out its key features. Basically, I'm pointing out what distinguishes it from other research methods. So when they're asking me for one research method, I make it very clear, this is the one I'm using which is different from all the others. So that's all. You can take it as a brief introduction also, and I see no harm personally in having a brief introduction in an SAQ as well. Okay, so what differentiates a true experiment from other methods of research, such as a self-report or an observation, is that it investigates a cause-effect relationship. So I have mentioned that at the beginning. Now, what differentiates a true experiment from other experiments, such as a natural or a quasi-experiment, is the fact that the researcher manipulates the independent variable. In a true experiment, he also measures a dependent variable and he hypothesizes or he investigates a relationship between the independent and dependent variable. It's definitely going to be a causative relationship. We mentioned right at the beginning that it is the investigation of a cause-effect relationship. So we need not repeat that. So in the first 2-3 sentences, I have just made the research method I am going to discuss about very prominent. Then, without wasting any time, I link the research method that I have outlined with the study that I am going to be discussing. Again, using the same principle, just as I got down to the research method very quickly, immediately, in the same way I have got down to naming the study immediately. Hosfeld et al. Is the study that I am going to link to the research method, and that I'm making the examiner aware directly right at the beginning of the paragraph. So again, I don't beat around the bush. I also name the hormone that has been investigated in this study immediately. Right at this point, we need to know that we are not aiming to explain the Hosfeld study in this answer. So students have a tendency, the way they have prepared all their SAQs, the next thing that comes to their mind is, okay, I've named the study. Now I need to describe its aim, procedure and results. That is not what we are going to do here. The nature of the question that we are addressing is very different right now. So instead of thinking about the aim, procedure and the hypothesis, I am going to think about how I can name all the characteristics of the research method that I have identified and link each of those characteristics to the study that I have named. So my entire line of thinking is going to be to keep on naming the features of the research method and to in turn, one at a time, keep on linking those features to the study that I have mentioned. Some of the defining features of the research method I have already outlined in the paragraph above. So first I'm linking those very defining features to the study that I have named. I already mentioned that a true experiment has a hypothesis linking the independent variable and the dependent variable. So let me now point out in the Hosfeld et al. Study, what was the hypothesis? If instead of this I'm discussing any other study, I should know very well what the hypothesis was in that study, and I need to link it with I need to outline it correctly. So the Hosfeld study's hypothesis was that the release of hormone oxytocin will increase trusting behavior in humans. One thing is, I am assuming you know the Hosfeld study well. Just like you're not supposed to be explaining the study here, I'm not going to explain it either in this video, because my agenda is different right now. So even if you don't know the study well, just take it as, okay, this is the hypothesis of the study that has been clearly outlined over here. The other thing is that, as you can see, to be able to answer this type of a question, you really need to know what the characteristics are of the research method that you're discussing. As obvious as it might seem to some of you who study the course companion or the In Thinking IB website really well, Think IB website, you know your research methods really well, you'll feel why I'm mentioning this, but I want those who have been ignoring these things to understand. You have to know all your research methods and their characteristics extremely well to be able to answer this question. So if you haven't gone through, you've just skipped the discussion on research methods on the website or in your course companion, do learn it properly. It will help you in your paper 3 as well if you're an HL student. Okay, so coming back to the discussion. Oh yes, one more thing I forgot to discuss, I'm sorry. But when we are mentioning experimental terms like hypothesis, independent variable, dependent variable, some of us might come to believe that we need to define all these terms in general. So I need to explain in this answer what an independent variable is, or what a dependent variable is, what a hypothesis is. Not at all. You just need to link it to the study that you've presented. You are explaining what a hypothesis is by exemplifying it with the study. You are explaining what an independent variable is by exemplifying it through the study. In general, what these terms mean is not something to be explained in this answer, because they've clearly mentioned in the question, explain one research method in one study, not in general. That's why it's so important to read the question and keep the wording in mind while answering the question. So next I have outlined the independent and the dependent variables of the study. The independent variable is always in any SAQ, ERQ, any answer mentioned along with its levels. So the independent variable in the Cosfeld study was the release of oxytocin, and its levels were the intranasal dose of oxytocin for one group and the placebo injection for the other group. So I have mentioned the IV with the levels. No matter which experiment you are discussing, make sure that this is how you present your IV. In the same way, the dependent variable I am presenting in operational terms. Operationalization is very important. Avoid presenting the dependent variable in general terms. So how do we operationalize the dependent variable? We mentioned how it was measured and quantified. So in this study, it was measured and quantified as the average amount of money units transferred by the investor to the trustee in the simulated game. So I have very clearly specified that. Now these were the defining features of a true experiment that I've linked with the study. Next, I will link some additional features. These features are additional, but they are not secondary or they are not unimportant in defining an experiment. They are key to the experiment. So these are very important features of a true experiment, not the very defining ones, but which are necessarily found in experiments, in true experiments that I'm linking with the study. If instead, for example, I was discussing a case study, then the features I would link to my study would include use of multiple methods, in-depth investigation, triangulation, use of investigation of multiple sources. So those very defining features and key features of a case study I would have linked to the study that I was explaining. Here, because it's a true experiment, my next feature that I've explained is a controlled setting. Controlled setting or controls are very important to a true experiment. Within controls, for whichever study we have selected, we can discuss some of the participant variables that were controlled, some of the situational variables that were controlled, a mix of these or either one of these. Aim at remembering 2 or 3 specific controls from the study that you will discuss over here. Do not just write that there were many controls in the study. They're not asking you to name features, they're asking you to explain how those features were found in the study. Explain how they were found. Whenever you write any point, like you're writing controls or control setting, think, why are we saying that this study had a controlled setting? Why are we saying that the dependent variable was operationalized in this study? That answer to why which we see in the command term explain, is going to help you to write this answer. So for the Kosfeld study, some of the controls were careful selection of participants according to criteria like they should not have consumed alcohol or caffeine before the experiment, or not have smoked before the experiment. Also, situationally, we saw that the researchers excluded some participants to whom they could not correctly administer oxytocin, or those who had become doubtful about the validity of the simulated game. Similarly, I have named some controlled participant variables as well, such as not allowing the investors and the trustees to meet each other before the experiment. So not pairing those who had met each other prior to the experiment. Not letting the investor know about how much the trustee had had returned money units to him throughout the course of the study. I could have presented a lesser number of controls also. That would also suffice. 2 or 3 controls are enough when we are pointing out that in a true experiment, controls have been maintained. Another very important feature of a true experiment is standardization. So in the Kosfeld study, how the procedure was kept constant for all participants, so how it was standardized was by administration of a very specific quantity of oxytocin to each and every participant. I have also specified the experimental design. Whenever we are discussing a true experiment, we have 3 possibilities of experimental designs that have been used: repeated measures design, independent groups design, or matched groups design. So we need to specify that as well. As far as Kosfeld study was concerned, definitely it was an independent groups design. If we have more specifications about the experimental design, we can add those as well, like I have added here. If there was double blinding in the experimental design and there was random assignment of participants to their respective groups. Besides that, another important feature that we see in a true experiment is replication. Now here the question that will arise is, do we have to mention each of these features? Do we have to mention so many features and link them to the study that we are explaining? Always take a sample or a model answer as a sample. It's not something to be memorized and written. It's just there to guide you into how to write your answer. So definitely, when you're writing your answer, some of these points might not be included in it. You could skip a few of these points, or you can add some points of your own. There are no hard and fast rules that if you're discussing a true experiment, these features have to be. No. In fact, in some of the studies, some of these features would not apply. Like the next one about replication. Replication is not done in every true experiment. In some true experiments, there is a possibility of replication, but the replication hasn't been done so far. In Kosfeld study, the researchers themselves did replication, so I have included it as a point. Your answer does not have to match my answer. So to rule out alternative explanations that could serve as criticisms for their study, Kosfeld et al. Had repeated their study a number of times with slight variation. So they had replicated their study. I've presented one of the examples again to make it specific. Being specific is very important. So I don't just say in general, oh, the researchers had replicated the study many times. I've given a very concrete example that once they had replicated it to rule out the possibility that investors were just being empathic towards trustees. And so in that variation of the experiment, they asked investors to invest with computerized rather than human trustees. So I have mentioned that as an example. Finally, I have also mentioned that a two-sided Wilcoxon sign rank test was used. At this point also some students might get a little hyper and say, oh my god, do we have to remember this also? That there was an inferential statistic that was used? You do not have to. There is no compulsion. This is a model answer. Experimental studies do have this very key feature that they often collect quantitative data and they aim for quantitative analysis. So as far as the collection of quantitative data is concerned, I've already mentioned it when I have operationalized the dependent variable, that it was averages that was collected from each participant, average amount of monetary units invested. But then what is done further with that quantitative data which is collected? It's analyzed, right, with an inferential statistic to see whether the results apply to the population. So I've mentioned that as well. You could skip that point. You could include some points that you find easier to remember, easier to discuss. You feel you could explain those points, but you could include those. As I said, my aim was not to explain the study to you. If instead, let me just quickly give one more example before I end this video. If instead, supposing I was discussing a study which made use of the interview self-report method, in that case, I would have discussed features such as the format of the interview, whether it was semi-structured, structured, unstructured. That I would have taken as one of the features. Any reading of body language or non-verbal communication, the means of recording the transcripts from the interview. I would have discussed those features instead of these features, which I have discussed for a true experiment, experimental design, manipulation of the independent variable. So depending on which research method I've chosen, I should know very well what the specifications or the characteristics are, and I should know enough of them. I will not keep you in the blind by telling you it's okay to know 2 or 3 features. It isn't. If I have to give a rough estimate, just a rule of thumb, try to know at least 5 to 6 features, at least, of every research method so that you can write this answer well. Coming to one more point before I end the video, the word count. I have specified it here, 377 words. Now, a lot of students feel that, I don't know, they're being told this in their schools or something, that SAQs need to be really short. The maximum limit is 400, and they can aim for SAQs written in fewer words. There's no denying that, of course. There is a lower boundary and an upper boundary. But what happens is, your answers need to be comprehensive. They should not be incomplete, or they should not miss out on key points. What is found is when students use a lesser word limit to answer their SAQs, they do miss out on a lot of points that they should be covering. I am personally yet to come across an SAQ that has been written in only 200 or 250 words and it has been complete. I haven't come across it. I have come across SAQs that are approaching 400 words like this one is, and I have found those to be very comprehensive and those to really answer the question that has been asked. There is a positive correlation between the number of words that you use in your SAQ and its quality. That's what I strongly believe. Your opinions could be different, but that is what I recommend in terms of the word count of the SAQ. Okay, also before I forget, I have a website, ibpsych.excellingpsychology.com. I'll link it in the description box below. I know a lot of you would want the answer that I've presented here in a document format to refer to it as you're watching this video or for later reference. So I'll upload that also in a post on that site. There are other lessons also. So there are other posts that you can learn from that are already there on the site, and I do keep updating it from time to time. So if you've liked this lesson, you can visit that site as well for more discussions on your IBDP psychology course. Okay, so with that, I'm ending this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.